everyone. I'm so excited to speak to you all today. My name is Tamika, and I am the community lead and historical game designer for the upcoming game Dream of Darkness. And I'm here to talk to you about how we are attempting to decolonize some ideas of gender and sexuality in our game. Now, I really want to just preface this talk by saying that I am here to represent the work of a team. So not everything in this presentation is necessarily my own research. I'm doing the best job that I can in sort of amalgamating the work of a whole bunch of different people. And unfortunately, the historian who actually worked with us on this character was not able to be part of writing this conference paper in the end. So again, I'm doing the best job that I can to represent this work. So hopefully I can bring it all together and give you guys a good overview of what we're aiming to do. I'll just give you a brief plan. So I'll tell you a little bit about our game and the upcoming prototype, which is our boss fight with the Aztec deity Tezcatlipoca. Our opportunity lay in the depiction of Tezcatlipoca's consorts. So I'll talk a little bit about the background of Mesoamerican gender studies and sexuality studies, and the possibility that we found of the avatar of Tezcatlipoca having a male lover or a male consort. And so the result of that was our design of a male consort, the male Atlatonin, switching the presumed or assumed human gender of this avatar from female to male. In order to queer the experience of the player in encountering these diverse sexualities. And a few brief words about why we've decided to make this sort of change to the historical record and how we feel it's in line with the ideas of true invention in communicating some sort of historical truth. So very briefly first, a little bit of background about what our game is. So it's essentially a Lovecraft meets Aztecs, a 3D cosmic horror adventure with some stealth and puzzle elements in the gameplay. It is set during the height of the Aztec Empire and its colonization by the Spanish, so 1519 to 1521, in what is now modern-day Mexico. In our game, you'll be playing from multiple Aztec, Mesoamerican, and Spanish points of view. So there'll be multiple protagonists, and we're really showcasing the experiences of women, Indigenous people, and other marginalized perspectives that have not been represented in games in this history so far. The part of the game that I'm talking about in focus today is our upcoming prototype boss fight. So this is the first, I suppose, vertical slice that we're working on as a team. One of the first full 3D playable sections that we're developing. You can see some screenshots here on the side. So that is a very, very early in progress build. You can see much of it is still just level block out, but we have our protagonist Marina in the foreground and the illusion apparition of Tezcatlipoca in the background. And the bottom image is some concept art showing what this scene will eventually sort of look and feel like once it's all finished up. So the premise of this boss fight, it is set on the night of a festival dedicated to the god Tezcatlipoca. During this festival, a human avatar assumes the role of the god and is sacrificed. It's a common practice in Mesoamerican religion. Now, a few months after entering the capital of Tenochtitlan, the Spanish colonizers led by Cortez, actually Cortez was not there on this night, but he still led the colonizers, committed a massacre of unarmed civilians as they gathered for the festival. So our main character in this prototype is Marina. She is a historical figure, often called La Malinche, 13-year-old Nawa slave girl turned interpreter for Cortez's expedition. So in our prototype, she arrives in the capital, discovers this massacre, and the human avatar of Tezcatlipoca traps her in a nightmare illusion world to punish her for the actions of her Spanish allies. In this segment, she has to escape the illusion by finding an ally to help her. And along the way, she finds and desecrates the keepsakes belonging to Tezcatlipoca's 4 consorts, which provokes his grief and weakens his power. I'll give you a little bit of historical background first about Tezcatlipoca and his 4 consorts, so you know what we're drawing from in this depiction. So Tezcatlipoca was one of the most important deities in the Aztec pantheon. He was a powerful, omnipresent, omniscient creator deity. He was associated with chaos, with night, jaguars, and a smoking obsidian mirror. These were all of his symbols. Now, during the Toshkat festival, the moment that's depicted in our game, a young male captive from an enemy nation would be chosen to live for a year as his avatar. And this avatar would live in luxury, be treated like a king, but then be sacrificed during this festival. And you can see on the screen here, on the side, there is a depiction of the 4 consorts with the sacrificed avatar. Would set a couple with 4 women who were chosen to represent 4 goddesses. And I've got some representations of these goddesses here. Now, the really interesting thing is that the 4th goddess, Atlatonen, is one that we don't know much about. That's why there's a question mark there representing her. And there's a few theories about what she might represent, maybe earth, maybe coastlines, possibly leprosy or the disfigured. But unlike the other 3 goddesses here, we don't have a codex image or any visual representations of her, which is really interesting. So we found an opportunity here, and this was provoked by our historians making 2 key observations for us. Firstly, the word for wives or consorts was not gender specific. And there was also some evidence to suggest that maybe the male avatar actually had a male consort at some point. So we thought, how can we integrate this gender and sexual diversity into our game and show some of it in this sort of short segment? It certainly falls in line with our mission statement. So this is a text that's on our website, just briefly introducing you guys to it here. One of our goals, stated aims in creating this game is to destabilize dominant narratives and colonialize through a diversity of perspectives. So we're really trying to approach this with a decolonial attitude, showcasing Indigenous perspectives, women, diverse genders and sexualities. So we can challenge those traditional colonial representations of this period, which tend to dominate. Now, I will briefly try to talk about gender in Mesoamerica, but this is a very complex field. So this will be a terrible oversimplification, but I'll just try and highlight some of the key things that are important to our discussion. What's really important to remember about this period is that we can probably never know for sure exactly how the Aztecs conceptualized sex and gender. So much of it has been filtered through Spanish colonial perspectives, and it's very difficult for us to fully comprehend. We just don't have that much to go by. But we do know that it was likely very different to how the Spanish that colonized understood them, and perhaps how we conceptualize sexuality and gender today. So traditionally, a lot of these Indigenous primary sources, like the codexes, have been approached through these very Western Eurocentric lenses. But scholars have found that this tends to misunderstand, mistranslate, misrepresent understandings about femininity, masculinity, gender, sexuality, etc. So Pete Segal is one of the key scholars in this period, and he's argued that Aztec mythology cannot be conceptualized in a symbolic universe that has binary divisions between male and female. So the term for God, for example, Teot, had no gender to it inherently. Classical Nahuatl does actually not contain gendered pronouns at all. There are ways to say whether something is a male or a female, man or a woman, but the pronouns themselves are not gendered. There are some deities such as Siwakwat and even Tezcatlipoca himself were ambiguously gendered or bigendered, and the sort of progenitor deity Ometuat was beyond gender. So there was a very strong current of this sort of multiple genders existing within one deity at the same time. So there's a lack of fixity in Nawa cosmology that comes through here, a lack of fixity about ideas of gender. And so we thought, is it within the realms of historical possibility to depict one of the consorts as male and therefore queer out Tezcatlipoca's relationships? Well, to talk about this question, we need to talk about the Aztecs and same-sex relationships. And again, there is so much here that we just don't know. And it's also really important to acknowledge that the Aztecs were not a monolith. There were a lot of different groups, cities within what we know as the Aztec Empire. And it's likely that there were different attitudes to this. However, we do know that same-sex relationships were often punished in daily life, as sexual conduct in general was very strictly controlled in Aztec society. However, it's difficult to know how much they were condemned or how much they were permitted, because there's absolutely evidence that it did occur. It was something that was understood, and there's even some evidence that there may have been roles to play for some of these people, some of these non-normative gendered people, to play a role in some of the ritualistic and religious practices in society. So on the screen, I have a few words that we know from Nahuatl that indicate non-normative sexuality. Interpreted to mean the male in the passive role or a sodomite. Not a nice word, but that is how scholars translate it. And it does have a derogatory connotation to it. Now, leading on to our idea of the male consort. So we know that there were what we today would consider to be queer people. Obviously, the Aztecs probably didn't understand them as queer, but we know that these people existed. Now, there is a deep cut from the Florentine Codex that one of our historians drew our attention to. So at one point, the avatar of one of the versions of Tezcatlipoca, it's complicated, is referred to as a Quiloni. You'll remember that that means like a passive male receiver. The full line is, you Tezcatlipoca are a sodomite. You have misled and deceived me. And that's a translation from our cultural officer, Javeria Abasi, who has helped me tremendously with this presentation. So thank you so much, Javeria. Some sources actually suggest that the avatar of Tezcatlipoca lived with another male avatar who was also sacrificed during the festival. It's really difficult to find more information about this, but the possibility is certainly there. And on the screen, I do have the page from the Florentine Codex representing the word Quiloni being used for Tezcatlipoca. So we thought perhaps we can actually turn one of these consorts into a male. But of course, you may be thinking, well, that's not accurate. They were for women. They were for human women chosen. So why would you change it and do something that's not strictly historically accurate? And certainly our historians were, maybe a little bit reluctant to give up the 4 female consorts. However, we're sort of invoking the concept of true historical invention to make this change in order to queer our game. So true invention is a concept coined by the film scholar Robert Rosenstone. And he conceptualized false invention as distinct from true invention when talking about historical fiction. False invention, Rosenstone says, is any kind of invented or fictional element that ignores the discourse of history. It ignores the findings, arguments, issues, and data in the historical scholarship. And it indulges in invention that's not within the realm of historical plausibility. So it's indulgent and it doesn't communicate a historical argument that is valid in the scholarship. However, true invention actually engages with the discourse of history. So the events and characters that we see may be entirely invented, but the work doesn't propose anything that actually clashes with the historical arguments and discourses and ideas in the scholarly literature. And true invention should add to our understanding of a period, even if the literal events represented did not actually happen. So although our male Atlatonin is not literal historical fact, it still represents a historical truth, that gender and sexuality in the Aztec cosmology were complex and fluid, and that Tezcatlipoca's own ritualistic relationships may have been non-heteronormative. They were certainly non-monogamous, non-mononormative, and that is something that we are absolutely showing. So what have we done in our game design? Well, the 4 consorts here have become this. We have the male design for Atlatonin. And you're probably thinking, what is that creepy looking mask thing? Well, this is the keepsake that our protagonist Marina and the player will find in order to desecrate and cause grief to Tezcatlipoca. This is going to be an emotional segment of the game. Every time one of the keepsakes is desecrated, the player is meant to feel the connection and the love between Tezcatlipoca's avatar and his consorts. So what we did here was create a face that was a male representation, a male lover, in order to show this to the player with visual storytelling. The actual gods and goddesses themselves do not appear in the game. It's only their keepsakes. And because this particular goddess's keepsake was a mask cut from thigh skin, it was a perfect way to visually show the gendering of this character that we're going with in the game. So just to summarize that all for you, the decolonial perspectives on Nawa gender and sexuality reveal a sort of fluidity and non-fixity in Nawa cosmology, as well as the possibility of a male lover for Tezcatlipoca. His 4 consorts were human women chosen to represent goddesses. However, due to the fluidity of gender and sexuality in the Nawa rites, This spurred us to utilize some true invention and create a sort of historical composite, bringing together multiple elements that are true, but combining them in an invented way that would create our narrative and our player's experience. So we turned one of Tezcatlipoca's consorts into a male, which allowed us to explore the many possible lovers of the avatar of Tezcatlipoca in a ritualistic way. So we strived to integrate these decolonial analyses of gender and sexuality into our game, questioning Eurocentric hetero and mononormativity and creating an opportunity to queer our gameplay experience with regards to historical conceptualizations of gender and sexuality. So I think I've reached bang on 15 minutes there, so I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for listening and having me. I hope that I didn't cram too much in there and that it was all sort of comprehensible for you and that my 2 a.m. brain wasn't too scattered. So thank you so much for listening. I'm really happy to be able to share this work with you guys.